Hi there, these comments are for DM. I'm just using your initials for privacy purposes because I am doing this YouTube video. And you just sent me an email yesterday, and let's take a look at your situation. And by the way, my name is Michael Buckoff. I am a professor at California State University, San Bernardino. I teach mostly the first year composition classes. I even teach a lot of the first year composition class, the multilingual classes actually. So I have a lot of experience working with a diverse group of college students from many countries, from many languages. Okay, so in your situation, you teach high school English. You say, I'm the department chair. The teachers in our department are interested in teaching English in such a way that our students are as prepared for college as they can possibly be. In order to achieve this goal, we'd like to hear some of the insights you have from teaching at the college level. Judging from your experiences with students just out of high school or maybe a few years out of high school, so I'm actually dealing with the students just out of high school mostly, so you've come to the right place here. You say, what high school level preparation would have eased their transition into college and would have made their efforts in college level English more productive? If you could find a few minutes to dash off a few reflections on this topic, we'd greatly appreciate it. And if you're able to attach an example or two of a writing assignment you give in one of your classes, this would also be quite instructive. I don't want to take much of your time, but anything you could offer that might serve to help us make informed curriculum decisions would be helpful. Thanks so much. All right, so what I want to talk about right now is let me give you some comments on the students who don't pass my first year composition courses, and why is that? What are some of the problems that these students are having? And there's really three things. I'll be honest with you. When I talk to my writing students, really from the first day and the first week, I tell them, I go, look, if you can just do three things, just three specific things, you will most likely be able to be helpful. So this is what I tell them exactly. Number one, be here. Show up for class. Number two, be prepared when you're in class. That means when we have an assignment, we have a workshop, there's some discussion of a reading, these students should be prepared on that day to work on these topics. The third thing I tell them is to turn in assignments on time. So most of my students who don't pass, who struggle, they just simply are not showing up. That's the biggest issue. What happens is I teach students who come from a lot of backgrounds, and sometimes these students, the parents actually want them only sometimes they're just not showing up, they're not in class, and that's really the biggest issue. So I try to encourage them to show up on a regular basis so they can understand what's going on and what's happening. Especially there's certain days where we will be discussing our project, our writing project. We'll talk about the different parts of it. I'll discuss it with the class. I'll have different students ask questions about it. And guess what? On that particular day, I'll have 6 or 7 people absent. And obviously, it's not surprising that these are exactly the people that struggle with completing the writing project because they weren't in class on the day or the days that we discussed it. So that's probably the biggest piece of advice you can give your high school students. Is in high school you're required to show up for class, and and they take attendance and things, but when students get to college, they get a lot more freedom and flexibility, and sometimes with that freedom they misuse it and they simply quit showing up. And even in some cases, I just forgot I was going to say this before, I've had a lot of my students who miss class because their parents need them to babysit for their younger siblings. So I always tell my students, I go, look, you need to tell your parents that my writing class has an attendance policy. You can't miss more than 5 or 6 absences during the quarter, or it will cause you to fail the class. So I always tell my students to share my attendance policies with their parents, with their employers and anybody else who may have some power over whether or not they show up regularly for my class. That's the biggest issue right there. So they need to show up, they need to be prepared, they need to turn in things on time. Those are the three main things. Students who don't do well in my first year comp class, they're having problems in those three areas. So what could you do at the high school level? I don't know. Hopefully your students are showing up. I mean, they have to, right? I mean, it's their attendance policies in high school, I'm sure. So you have to just tell them, say, look, okay, we have an assignment that's due on this day. They absolutely have to get that assignment in on that day. So the high school teachers should enforce and tell students, look, here is my policy on late work. You need to comply with this policy or you're not going to get credit for this particular class. So that's maybe one thing they can do to prepare. Now let's talk about the writing and the reading thing for a minute. So having said what I'm saying here, I'm just saying that students should be prepared, they should be diligent, they should be showing up regularly, turning things in on time, right? Okay, now let's talk about what types of writing or reading problems they might have when they're in my writing classes. And these things I'm okay with. I have no problem when my students have writing issues. They might not know how to organize, for example, writing the thesis, so they're not sure how to structure their developmental paragraphs, things like that. I'm okay with that. If they have these kinds of issues, we can work these things out. We can deal with these things as long as they're willing and they're diligent and they're showing up on a regular basis. I normally don't see many issues with solving these kinds of issues, but if I'm explaining some things that your high school teachers can do and to ease their transition into college, one of my problems is last quarter we were doing a 6 to 7 page paper. It was in my English 106 class that meets on Tuesday and Thursday. And this particular class was created because a lot of these students didn't pass their writing class in the previous quarter at Cal State, so then they formed another class to give them one more chance so they could complete the first year writing requirement. So these guys all showed up for my writing class. So what was some of the issues? Part of the problem that this particular group, I think, is having is these students are not able to complete these 6 to 7 pages. Many of them, they were only writing anywhere from 3 to 4 pages, and the expectation was 6 to 7. So for whatever reason, they were not able to complete these assignments with the depth and the complexity of thought that they needed to. Of course, a lot of these students who had these trouble were exactly the same ones who were missing a lot of class, right? And of course, they suffered when they tried to put this assignment together. So maybe one thing that you guys can do at your high school level is push them to write longer assignments and not just assignments where they're summarizing or researching other people's ideas, but they're actually interacting with the text. So instead of just doing a book report, you know, a student, we have students like in my writing class, they actually do a book review. They have to actually evaluate the book and explain whether they like it or not and why based on a certain set of criteria. So students are more comfortable in the first year comp. Yeah, they're fairly comfortable explaining other people's ideas, but when it comes to interacting and analyzing and arguing and positioning their points in relation to the text, they do have some problems doing that. So any kind of work you guys can do at the high school level, we're getting used to students to write longer assignments with more thought, in which case they are interacting with text and so on. That's good. Now, the other thing that might be helpful is if you're like I am, I teach a lot of students with a background in Spanish, right? I'm going to say a majority of my students are Hispanic at California State University, San Bernardino. So what it means is they're hearing a lot of Spanish at home, and they might not be hearing as much English, and maybe as they grew up, they might not have read as much English type readings as someone else, or maybe they have, I don't know. So anything that you can do at the high school level, getting students used to reading in English. They can be reading newspapers, they can be reading magazines, they can be reading books, anything like that. A lot of my students come from a background where they have simply not done much reading at all. So to encourage that reading, even if they come from high school having read Harry Potter and some of those kinds of books, I'm great with that. That's a great experience for them. But a lot of my students, they have not read anything. They've never read a newspaper. They're not used to reading magazines. The only thing they're used to doing really is reading whatever they see on their phone. They're used to that, but that's kind of smaller chunks of text with a lot of pictures and advertising and that. So they're just simply not used to reading and concentrating in English. So anything you can do that would help them get more used to reading in English, that would also be, I think, very helpful. And the other thing is, because a lot of my students have not had a regular routine of reading before coming to college, obviously they have a lot of language issues, both with vocabulary and grammar. So that's also kind of a big issue, but I'm okay with it. I'm okay if my students have problems, for example, with comma splices and fragments and typos and misspellings. And they do have a lot of that trouble. They have a lot of problems with pronoun agreement and misplaced modifiers. And sometimes my writers have a tendency to write in a more simplistic, choppy type sentence or paragraph type level. So they definitely struggle in that sense. So that would also be helpful at the high school level, is even if students practice editing, they learn to edit their own writing, where they write a paper, maybe they let it sit for 2 or 3 weeks without looking at it at all, then they come back and read the paper and polish it a little bit more. They can focus on things like subject-verb agreement. They can focus on sentence style or sentence variety, or they can eliminate those sentence structure errors like comma splices, run-ons, and fragments. There's quite a few of my first-year comp students. They have just an enormous number of problems with the actual polish of the essay. So anything at the high school level to help improve their editing skills, that's also important. So those are just some of my comments. I don't know if this is going to help, but what I'm going to do now is I will include in this response to you, I'll include one of my sample syllabi. I'll put one from this quarter, from my spring quarter 2015. I'll give you a copy of my English 106 syllabus so you can take a look at that. That'll give you an idea of some of the course policies at the college level. Also, my actual writing assignments are right in there in the syllabus. So I'll give you that. You can take a look at that. So in conclusion, I don't know if there's any way to really conclude a video like this, but I hope I've given you some information that lets you know some of the struggles and the challenges that students have when they come to college from high school. I've explained to you a little bit about some of the problems they might have adjusting in terms of the expectations, for example, of showing up and attending class on a regular basis. So anything that you can do at your level to help encourage students, they got to be serious. And a lot of my students too, they actually get financial aid, so they're getting benefit from the state to be in college, so they should look at this as a great opportunity, a very serious opportunity to improve their writing and their English and to get an education, which is going to really help benefit them and also California and ultimately the United States. So it's very beneficial that our students here in California get educated at the college level. It makes a really big difference for everybody. All right. Anyway, thank you very much.